Algorithm that kept him awake during countless late-night self-teaching sessions was now breaking down on massive display screens, with an error pattern he recognized instantly. Elizabeth Morgan tapped her Louboutins against the floor shoes worth more than Andre's monthly rent. Stanford MBA, venture capital connections, 3 prestigious degrees. He had none of those things. What he did have was the solution they desperately needed. 2 hours to prove her wrong. 2 hours to change everything. She'd never see it coming. Andre Jackson knew exactly 3 things about Elizabeth Morgan before today. First, she was the 35-year-old wunderkind CEO who'd raised $300 million for TechVision's revolutionary AI robotics platform. Second, she exclusively dated men with net worths exceeding 8 figures. And third, in the 18 months he'd worked security at this building, she had never once looked him in the eye. Until now. "I'm sorry. Did our minimum wage doorman just volunteer to solve our AI crisis?" Elizabeth's voice carried the practiced calm of someone who'd never needed to raise it to get what she wanted. "The same problem that stumped our Stanford and MIT engineers for nearly a day." Someone snickered. Andre noticed David Chen, the young engineer who'd overheard his muttered solution, looking at the floor, shoulders hunched. "I understand the quantum learning dilemma in your code," Andre said quietly. Elizabeth's perfect eyebrows arched. "Do you now? And where did you earn your PhD in artificial intelligence? Security Guard Community College?" The hackathon space stretched before them, once pristine workstations now cluttered with energy drink cans and food containers. 50 of Silicon Valley's brightest minds had been working non-stop to fix a fatal flaw in TechVision's breakthrough AI system. Their deadline for the investor demonstration was less than 48 hours away. 3 years ago, Andre would have been among them, before his full scholarship evaporated when his mother's medical bills consumed their family savings. He'd been 6 credits shy of his computer science degree when he'd had to drop out. Now, at 28, he worked 3 security shifts to pay rent on his cramped Oakland apartment, squeezing in self-education between midnight and dawn, machine learning textbooks, open-source AI forums, free university lectures, whatever he could get his hands on. "I'm serious," Andre said. "Your system is experiencing cascade failures because your quantum learning algorithm is prioritizing efficiency over stability. It's creating recursive error patterns in your neural pathways." The room went quiet. Elizabeth's smile faltered slightly. David finally looked up. "That's actually what I was thinking too." Elizabeth turned sharply toward David. "Is that so? And you're just mentioning this now?" David shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't sure until I heard him say it." "It matches what I've been seeing in the debug logs." James Wilson, TechVision's current chief engineer, stepped forward. "Elizabeth, maybe we should... You believe you can fix what James and his team can't?" Elizabeth cut him off, refocusing on Andre. Andre met her gaze. "I believe I can identify the problem. That's the first step to fixing it." Elizabeth studied him for a long moment. The room held its breath. Then she laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Well, this is certainly the most entertaining interruption we've had today." She gestured dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen, our security guard thinks he can save the company. Let's humor him, shall we?" She stepped closer to Andre, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume. Her voice dropped but remained loud enough for everyone to hear. "Fix it and I'll marry you," she repeated, mockery dripping from every syllable. "When you fail, remember your place. Security is by the door, not in the server room." Andre's expression remained unchanged, but something shifted in his eyes. Not anger, determination. "And if I succeed?" he asked quietly. Elizabeth smiled, confident in the impossibility of the scenario. "Then I suppose we'll have a wedding to plan, won't we?" More laughter rippled through the exhausted room. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You have 2 hours. Give him the backup laptop, Elizabeth instructed suddenly, turning back. We wouldn't want him accidentally seeing our entire code base. James hesitated. That's the old i5 with limited RAM. It can barely run the diagnostic tools, let alone the full simulation environment. Perfect. Elizabeth smiled thinly. Should be more than adequate for a self-taught expert. Andre sat down at the designated workspace as a security guard brought over an outdated laptop. The machine looked like it had been gathering dust in storage for years. Several engineers exchanged glances, their exhausted faces momentarily animated by this unexpected entertainment. I'll need access to the error logs and the core quantum learning module, Andre said, his voice level. Elizabeth crossed her arms. James, give him read-only access to the debugging environment. Nothing more. James leaned over, typing in administrator credentials. I've restricted you to the broken module and related logs, he explained quietly. That's all we can authorize without board approval. Andre nodded, already scanning the screen. The laptop struggled to render even the basic debugging interface, its cooling fan whirring loudly in protest. But it was enough. The code on the screen, elegant, complex, and fatally flawed, began to tell its story. Oh, and Andre? Elizabeth called from across the room. Your timer started 30 seconds ago. Andre didn't respond, already immersed in the streams of data. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, navigating through the debugging interface despite its lag. 3 engineers drifted closer, curiosity temporarily overcoming their skepticism. He actually seems to know the debugging shortcuts, one whispered. Probably just watched someone else do it, another replied. My kid can mimic keyboard commands too. Andre tuned them out. The problem was revealing itself layer by layer, more complex than he'd initially thought, but following a pattern he recognized from his late-night studies of experimental quantum computing forums. Tech Vision had implemented a cutting-edge approach, but they'd missed something fundamental. 20 minutes passed. The room's attention gradually shifted back to their own tasks, the novelty of the security guard's challenge fading. Only David remained nearby, watching Andre work with increasing interest. You're focusing on the neural pathway formation, David observed quietly. Everyone else has been troubleshooting the output layer. Andre nodded slightly. The problem isn't in the output. It's in how the system learns. That's what I kept saying, David muttered. No one would listen. Mr. Chen. Elizabeth's voice cut through their conversation. I believe you have your own work to do. David straightened immediately. Yes, of course. And please don't assist our contestant. That would defeat the purpose of the challenge. As David reluctantly moved away, Elizabeth approached Andre's workstation. She stood behind him, her presence deliberately intimidating as she leaned over his shoulder. Finding it a bit more challenging than fixing the break room microwave? She asked, loud enough for nearby engineers to hear. Andre's fingers never paused on the keyboard. The break room microwave works fine. I fixed it last week. A few engineers stifled laughs, not entirely sure if they were laughing at Andre or with him. Elizabeth's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Fascinating, she said coldly. Perhaps that should have been your career path. Appliance repair. She watched his screen for a moment longer. The laptop struggled to process Andre's commands, each operation taking 2 or 3 times longer than it would on a proper development machine. The deliberate handicap was obvious to everyone. 40 minutes gone, Elizabeth announced. Not even halfway through the debugging process. Looks like I won't need to shop for a wedding dress after all. She walked away, but her words lingered. Andre felt eyes on him again, some curious, some pitying, most just waiting for the inevitable failure. He focused harder on the screen, mentally compensating for the laptop's limitations. The core of TechVision's AI was revolutionary, a quantum-inspired learning system that adapted faster than any conventional model. But in their pursuit of speed, they'd created instability. The system was essentially suffering from the computational equivalent of a seizure, learning too quickly in some areas while neglecting critical structural foundations. An hour into his challenge, Andre hit a wall. The limited debugging environment wouldn't allow him to test his theory fully. He needed deeper access to the system architecture. "James," he called, his voice calm but firm. "I need access to the framework layer." James looked up from his station, then glanced at Elizabeth, who was in conversation with senior engineers across the room. He approached Andre cautiously. "That's restricted code," James said, lowering his voice. "Even half our team doesn't have access." "I can't diagnose the full problem without it," Andre explained. "The issues are propagating from deeper in the architecture." James studied him for a long moment. "You really do understand this, don't you?" Andre met his gaze steadily. "Yes." After a tense pause, James made a decision. He leaned over and quickly entered another set of credentials, granting Andre expanded access. "Don't make me regret this," he whispered. "What's happening over there?" Elizabeth called out, her radar for irregular activities apparently flawless. "Just checking his progress," James replied smoothly. "Still a long way to go?" Elizabeth checked her watch pointedly. 1 hour down, 1 to go. She raised her voice to address the room. "Anyone want to place bets on how long before he gives up?" A few nervous chuckles followed, but the energy had shifted. More engineers were glancing toward Andre's station now, watching the security guard work with increasing intensity. Something about his focus and methodical approach didn't match their expectations. With deeper access, Andre quickly confirmed his suspicion. The quantum learning algorithm was beautifully designed, but fundamentally imbalanced, prioritizing speed over structural integrity. He began mapping out the necessary corrections, his mind racing ahead of the struggling laptop's ability to execute his commands. As he worked, he became aware of a small audience forming behind him. 3 junior engineers were watching his process with undisguised interest. Even James had drifted back, studying Andre's approach with professional curiosity. "That's not standard protocol," one engineer murmured, pointing at Andre's restructuring of the learning parameters. "But it makes sense," another replied quietly. "Look at how he's rebalancing the priority weighting." Elizabeth noticed the gathering and frowned. This wasn't proceeding as she'd expected. The security guard was supposed to fumble around briefly before admitting defeat, providing a moment of levity for her overworked team before they returned to the real work. Instead, he was drawing attention, commanding respect, on her territory. 30 minutes remaining, she announced loudly, approaching the group. "I hope everyone's enjoying the show, but we do have an actual crisis to solve." The engineers dispersed reluctantly, returning to their stations. But the dynamic had changed. Eyes kept drifting back to Andre's corner, where the security guard continued to work with quiet intensity, seemingly oblivious to Elizabeth's attempts to marginalize him. The broken AI system that had resisted the efforts of 50 top engineers for nearly a day was beginning to reveal its secrets to a college dropout in a security uniform. And Elizabeth Morgan didn't like it one bit. 20 minutes left in our little experiment," Elizabeth announced, her voice carrying a brittle edge that hadn't been there before. She paced behind Andre, close enough that he could feel her presence without turning around. "Perhaps we should have security bring coffee for everyone. That seems more aligned with your skill set." Andre didn't respond, his attention fixed on the problem unfolding before him. The quantum learning algorithm's fundamental flaw was now clear, an elegantly conceived but fatally balanced equation at its core. The system was prioritizing efficiency over stability, creating cascading failures throughout the neural network. The solution required rewriting the priority weighting system. Simple in concept, complex in execution, especially on this outdated laptop that took 30 seconds to process commands that should take 2. "Do you even understand what you're looking at?" Elizabeth asked, her voice pitched to Carrie. Or are you just pressing buttons randomly, hoping for a miracle? A few engineers shifted uncomfortably at their stations. The mockery had stopped being entertaining and started feeling uncomfortable. Andre continued working, his expression unchanged. I asked you a question, Elizabeth said, her tone hardening. Professional courtesy suggests you should answer your superiors. Andre's fingers paused briefly on the keyboard. I understand exactly what I'm looking at, he replied, his voice calm and measured. Your quantum learning algorithm has an elegant architecture but a fundamental imbalance in its core equation. It's prioritizing processing efficiency over neural stability, creating recursive errors that compound with each learning cycle. The technical precision of his answer created a ripple of reaction through the room. Several engineers exchanged glances. James, the chief engineer, looked up from his station with renewed interest. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. This wasn't following her script. The security guard was supposed to be embarrassed by now, not providing coherent technical assessments. Fascinating theory, she said coldly. And where exactly did a security guard learn to analyze quantum learning algorithms? Between checking IDs and watching security cameras? Andre continued typing, implementing his solution line by careful line. The principles aren't classified. Most are discussed in open academic forums. The application is what matters, not the credentials of the person applying them. A junior engineer near the back coughed in what sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter. Elizabeth's head snapped in that direction, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass. 15 minutes, she announced, walking away from Andre's station. Let's not forget we have actual work to do once this diversion concludes. But her attempt to redirect attention failed. More engineers were now openly watching Andre work, drawn by the methodical way he was reconstructing the system's core balancing functions. David had edged back to a position where he could see Andre's screen, his expression shifting from curiosity to growing respect. He's reweighting the entire priority system, David whispered to another engineer. I suggested something similar yesterday, but no one would listen. Probably because you don't have 3 PhDs, the other engineer replied quietly. Credentials matter more than ideas around here. Elizabeth overheard this exchange, her expression darkening. She strode to the front of the room where James and the senior engineering team were gathered. This has gone on long enough, she said tersely. We're wasting valuable time on a publicity stunt. James glanced toward Andre's station. Actually, I've been watching his approach. It's unconventional, but there's logic to it. He's addressing the foundational issues rather than the symptoms. You can't seriously be suggesting a security guard might solve what your entire team couldn't, Elizabeth hissed, keeping her voice low enough that only the senior engineers could hear. James met her gaze steadily. I'm suggesting we shouldn't dismiss ideas based on their source. Elizabeth's perfect composure slipped for a moment, genuine anger flashing across her features. I didn't build this company by taking advice from uninformed outsiders. 10 minutes remaining, she announced loudly, regaining her professional demeanor. Let's prepare to refocus on our actual solution strategy once this exercise concludes. Andre barely registered her words. He'd isolated the core equation and rewritten it, creating a new balancing mechanism that would maintain stability without sacrificing learning speed. The antiquated laptop labored to process his changes, each operation painfully slow. David had given up all pretense of working on his own station and now stood openly watching Andre's progress. Other engineers were finding reasons to walk past, stealing glances at his screen. Something was happening that none of them had expected. The security guard was actually building a coherent solution. What happens if he actually fixes it? A junior engineer whispered to David. David shrugged. I don't think anyone considered that possibility. Elizabeth noticed the growing crowd around Andre's station and approached again, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished concrete floor. Unless you've all solved your assigned tasks, I suggest returning to your workstations, she said sharply. This company doesn't pay you to spectate. The engineers dispersed reluctantly, but the energy in the room had irrevocably shifted. All eyes kept drifting back to Andre, who continued working with focused intensity, seemingly oblivious to the drama surrounding him. 5 minutes, Elizabeth announced, standing directly behind Andre's chair. She leaned down, her voice low enough that only he could hear. You're out of your depth. You know that, right? Even if you stumble onto something useful, do you really think anyone will take a security guard seriously? Know your place. Andre's hands never stopped moving across the keyboard. The rewritten core was nearly complete. All he needed now was to run the diagnostic simulation, a process that would take at least 3 minutes on this struggling machine. 2 minutes, Elizabeth called out, stepping away. Her confidence had returned, bolstered by the apparent lack of results on Andre's screen. I hope we've all enjoyed this brief entertainment. Andre hit the final command to initiate the diagnostic, watching as the progress bar crept forward at an agonizing pace. The laptop's cooling fan whirred loudly, pushed to its limits by the complex simulation. Elizabeth checked her watch ostentatiously. And time's up. Thank you for the diversion, Mr. Jackson. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have actual work to... The diagnostic completed with a soft chime, cutting her off mid-sentence. The screen displayed results that made Andre straighten in his chair. It works, he said quietly. Elizabeth's smile froze. What was that? Andre turned the laptop toward her. The solution works. The diagnostic shows complete neural stability with 93% of the original processing efficiency. For perhaps the first time in her professional career, Elizabeth Morgan was momentarily speechless. That's impossible, Elizabeth said, staring at the diagnostic results on Andre's screen. The graph showed stable neural pathways where before there had been cascading failures. It's just a basic diagnostic, it doesn't prove anything. James stepped forward, examining the code modifications. You've completely restructured the priority weighting system, he observed, his eyebrows rising. This approach wasn't in any of our design documents. The original equation was elegant but unbalanced, Andre explained. It prioritized learning speed over structural integrity. I rebalanced it to maintain 93% of the speed while establishing self-correcting stability parameters. Engineers began gathering around his workstation, drawn by the technical discussion. Elizabeth watched with thinly veiled displeasure as her senior staff clustered around the security guard. James, is there any validity to this approach? She asked, her tone making clear the answer she expected. James straightened, meeting her gaze directly. It's unconventional, but theoretically sound. The diagnostic results are promising. Theoretically sound doesn't mean functional, Elizabeth countered. We need proof this actually resolves our issue. We should run it through the full testing suite, David suggested, no longer hiding his support for Andre's solution. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. On one condition, we use a proper development machine, not this diagnostic laptop. If the solution is valid, it should transfer seamlessly. James offered to transfer the code using his credentials. For 15 tense minutes, he worked while the room completely abandoned any pretense of other work. When complete, he initiated the comprehensive testing suite, a battery of stress tests designed to push the AI system to its limits. This will take approximately 20 minutes, James announced. No one moved. The stakes had become too high, the narrative too compelling. The security guard versus the CEO, the outsider versus the system. As the test progressed, metrics displayed on the main screen. Neural stability remained consistently high. Processing efficiency hovered around 93%, slightly lower than the original design, but well within acceptable parameters. It's holding, a senior engineer murmured. All pathways stable. The system entered its most challenging phase-rapid recursive learning that had previously triggered cascading failures. The room collectively held its breath. The metrics fluctuated briefly, then stabilized. Neural pathways remained intact. The final test phase completed with a simple status message. All parameters within optimal range. 50 of Silicon Valley's brightest minds stared at the results, then at the security guard who had achieved what they couldn't. David broke the silence, a smile spreading across his tired face. He did it. A murmur ran through the room, quickly growing into excited conversation. Engineers clustered around the main display, analyzing the results, discussing Andre's approach. One successful test doesn't validate the entire solution, Elizabeth said, her voice cutting through the growing excitement. We need extended stability monitoring, edge case testing. Elizabeth, James interrupted firmly. The solution works. All metrics confirm it. The priority weighting system he designed is actually more stable than our original architecture. How did you see it? A young engineer asked Andre directly. We've been staring at this problem for weeks. You were looking at the symptoms, the cascade failures, the processing inconsistencies. I looked at the foundation, the underlying equation that defines how your system learns and prioritizes. Where did you learn to code like this? David asked. Started at Berkeley on scholarship. Had to drop out 6 credits short when family medical bills hit. Been teaching myself ever since online courses, open forums, research papers I could access. This personal detail spread through the room, adding another dimension to the unfolding story. Not just a security guard with unexpected skills, but a former computer science student forced out of the system by circumstances beyond his control. Elizabeth watched as the narrative shifted before her eyes. She was losing control of the situation and her team's perception. Well, she said, stepping forward with a practiced smile. This has certainly been an unexpected development. While we'll need more comprehensive validation, it appears Mr. Jackson has provided a helpful perspective on our challenge. Mr. Jackson has done more than offer a perspective, James corrected firmly. He solved our core problem, something the entire team has been struggling with for weeks. And he did it in under 2 hours, on outdated hardware with limited access. Elizabeth's smile tightened. Yes, well, fresh eyes can sometimes see things differently. Fresh eyes backed by clear understanding, James added. This isn't luck or guesswork. This is legitimate expertise. The engineers murmured in agreement. The evidence was irrefutable, displayed in real time on screens throughout the room. I think, Elizabeth said carefully, we should discuss next steps in my office. James, would you and Mr. Jackson join me? Andre stood for the first time since beginning the challenge, his tall frame straightening after hours hunched over the inadequate laptop. In his security uniform, he should have looked out of place among the engineers. Somehow, he didn't. Actually, he said quietly, I believe we had a different agreement. The room went completely still. I'm sorry. Elizabeth's voice held a warning edge. Our agreement, Andre repeated, his tone respectful but firm. You said if I fixed the code, you'd make me chief engineer. A few engineers shifted uncomfortably. Others watched with undisguised fascination. This wasn't just technical drama anymore, it was a direct challenge to the established order. Elizabeth's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Surely you understood that was a joke, Mr. Jackson, a bit of hyperbole to lighten a tense situation. Actually, David interjected, his voice slightly elevated, you said, fix it, and I'll marry you. Then added, when you fail, remember your place. Elizabeth's gaze snapped to David with lethal precision. Thank you for the transcript, Mr. Chen. Your attention to detail is noted. The exact wording isn't important, Andre said, drawing her attention back. What matters is that I accepted a public challenge, delivered a solution, and demonstrated capabilities that benefit Tech Vision. Elizabeth's expression shifted into something more calculated. She was regrouping, adapting to the new reality. And we appreciate your contribution, she said, her voice modulated to sound generous. "We'd be happy to discuss a proper compensation package for your consultation today." It was a strategic pivot, recasting Andre's achievement as a one-time contribution rather than a demonstration of ongoing value. Several senior executives nodded approvingly. This was familiar territory, an unexpected problem solved, appropriate compensation offered, corporate hierarchy maintained. "I'm not looking for a consultation fee," Andre replied. The room held its breath. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something significant. Not just a technical breakthrough, but a potential redistribution of power. Elizabeth's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "What exactly are you looking for, Mr. Jackson?" Andre looked around the room at the engineers who had dismissed him, then watched in surprise, and now regarded him with cautious respect. At James, who had recognized his abilities despite his title and uniform. At Elizabeth, who still saw him as an anomaly to be managed rather than a talent to be embraced. "Recognition," he said simply. "Not just for me, but for what I represent." Elizabeth's expression remained professionally pleasant, but her tone cooled. "And what exactly do you represent, Mr. Jackson?" "Talent that doesn't come in expected packages," Andre replied. "People with unconventional backgrounds who could contribute significantly if given the opportunity." Several engineers nodded unconsciously. In an industry obsessed with pedigree, the right schools, the right previous employers, the right connections, Andre had struck a chord. "A noble sentiment," Elizabeth conceded, regaining her footing. "Perhaps we should discuss implementing a more diverse hiring initiative. Human resources could—" "I think Mr. Jackson deserves more than a committee discussion," James interrupted, stepping forward. "He's demonstrated exceptional abilities under pressure, abilities we desperately need." The chief engineer turned to face Andre directly. "I'd like to offer you a position on my team. Senior AI architect, reporting directly to me." A murmur swept through the room. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a public endorsement from TechVision's most respected technical leader. Elizabeth's composure slipped momentarily, genuine surprise flickering across her features before she controlled it. James had circumvented her authority, something he'd never done in their years working together. "That's an interesting proposal," she said carefully. "Though I believe executive hiring decisions typically involve more thorough evaluation processes." "We just witnessed the most thorough evaluation possible," James countered. "A critical problem, limited resources, extreme time pressure, and he delivered a solution that our entire team couldn't find in weeks." The room had gone completely silent again. This was no longer about Andre's technical achievement. It was about challenging the systems that had prevented someone like him from being recognized in the first place. Elizabeth recognized the shifting dynamics. She was losing not just this battle, but potentially the larger war for her team's respect. It was time for a strategic concession. "You're right, of course," she said, her tone softening into something almost genuine. "Exceptional talent deserves exceptional recognition." She turned to Andre, extending her hand. "Mr. Jackson, TechVision would be privileged to have you join our engineering team. James can work out the details of your role and compensation." It was a masterful recovery, graciously embracing what she couldn't prevent, while subtly reasserting her executive authority. The gesture appeared generous and forward-thinking, carefully masking the fact that she'd been forced into it. The room waited for Andre's response. Would he accept the olive branch? Take the prestigious position and substantial salary that came with it? It was everything a security guard turned software engineer could want: financial security, professional recognition, technical challenges worthy of his abilities. Andre looked at the extended hand for a long moment. Then he raised his eyes to meet Elizabeth's directly. "Thank you for the offer," he said quietly. "But I'm not interested in being the exception to the rule." Elizabeth's hand remained suspended between them, her expression flickering with genuine confusion. "I'm not sure I understand." "I'm not looking for special treatment," Andre explained. "I'm looking for systemic change." He turned to address the room at large. "There are thousands of people like me, talented, driven, capable, who never get the chance to demonstrate their abilities because they don't have the right credentials or connections. They work security jobs, drive ride shares, or staff help desks while their real talents go untapped." The engineers listened with growing attention. Many had entered the tech industry through unconventional paths themselves before acquiring the right credentials. They recognized the truth in his words. "What exactly are you proposing?" Elizabeth asked, her hand finally dropping to her side. "A talent identification and development program," Andre replied without hesitation. "One that actively seeks out unconventional candidates and evaluates them based on demonstrated abilities, not credentials." It was clear he'd thought about this, perhaps during countless nights working security while dreaming of opportunities to use his real skills. "A scholarship program?" Elizabeth suggested, trying to reframe his proposal into something more conventional and less threatening to the status quo. "More than that," Andre said firmly. "A complete rethinking of how we identify and develop talent. Blind skills assessments, paid apprenticeship paths, on-the-job training coupled with formal education." James nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "It could address our persistent talent shortage, and potentially bring fresh perspectives we're currently missing." Other senior engineers murmured agreement. In an industry constantly claiming to be constrained by limited talent, Andre's proposal struck a resonant chord. Elizabeth assessed the room carefully. The momentum had shifted irrevocably. Fighting this would only position her on the wrong side of both innovation and inclusion, a devastating combination in modern Silicon Valley. An intriguing concept, she conceded, though implementation would require significant resources and board approval. It was a polite deflection acknowledging the idea while highlighting potential obstacles. A standard executive tactic for managing uncomfortable innovation. "I'd be happy to draft a proposal," Andre offered, "with data on potential ROI and implementation frameworks." Elizabeth's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've clearly given this considerable thought." "I've had 3 years of night shifts to think about it," Andre replied with the hint of a smile. Unexpected laughter rippled through the room, genuine this time, not the uncomfortable kind that had accompanied earlier interactions. The tension eased slightly as engineers recognized the humanity behind the technical brilliance. Michael Reed, TechVision's founder and CEO, chose that moment to enter the hackathon space. His presence immediately commanded attention, tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of someone who had built a technology empire from scratch. "I heard we had a breakthrough," he announced, scanning the room before his gaze settled on James. "The system's stable?" "Completely," James confirmed. "We've identified and implemented a solution for the core instability issue." Michael's relief was palpable. "Excellent work. I knew your team would come through." "Actually," James said carefully, "the solution came from an unexpected source." He gestured toward Andre, still standing in his security uniform amid the engineers. "Andre Jackson identified the fundamental flaw in our quantum learning algorithm and implemented a solution that none of us had considered." Michael's expression shifted from confusion to interest. "Andre Jackson?" "He works security here," Elizabeth explained quickly, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "He happened to have some programming background and offered an interesting perspective." "That led to a complete solution our entire engineering team couldn't find," James added, refusing to let Andre's contribution be minimized. Michael studied Andre with newfound interest. "You're a security guard who solved our AI crisis?" "Former computer science student," Andre corrected gently. "Current security professional." Michael's focus sharpened. Berkeley, correct? Had to leave during your final semester? Andre couldn't hide his surprise. Yes, but how did you— Because I read your scholarship application, Michael replied. I sit on Berkeley's CS Department Scholarship Committee. Your application was exceptional, particularly your early work on adaptive learning systems. The revelation rippled through the room. Elizabeth's expression froze completely. When you disappeared from the program, I made inquiries, Michael continued. Family medical crisis, as I recall. We tried to reach out, offer assistance, but you'd already left campus. Andre nodded, momentarily speechless, the path not taken suddenly appearing before him in vivid detail. And now you're working security in my building, Michael said, a note of genuine regret in his voice, while our engineering team struggles with problems you can solve. He turned to Elizabeth, his expression unreadable. It seems we have some serious reconsidering to do about our talent identification processes. The shift in power was now complete. The founder and CEO had just publicly aligned himself with the security guard's perspective. Elizabeth recognized defeat when she saw it, but like any skilled executive, she knew how to transform defeat into strategic repositioning. I was just discussing that very issue with Mr. Jackson, she said smoothly. He has some innovative ideas about talent identification and development that align perfectly with our company values of inclusion and excellence. It was a masterful pivot, recasting herself as the champion of the very change she'd been resisting moments earlier. Michael wasn't fooled, but he appreciated the adaptability. I'd like to hear these ideas directly, he said, turning back to Andre, along with a more detailed explanation of your solution to our AI problem. The invitation was clear, not just to share ideas, but to step into a role commensurate with his abilities. Andre stood at the crossroads of his future, surrounded by the engineers who had dismissed him hours earlier and now regarded him with newfound respect. The security uniform that had made him invisible now highlighted the extraordinary nature of his achievement. The words formed in his mind with perfect clarity, a distillation of everything he believed about human potential and the artificial barriers that constrained it. In that moment of triumph, Andre Jackson made a decision that would reshape not just his future, but potentially the future of countless others who, like him, had been overlooked because they didn't fit the expected mold. I'd be honored to share my thoughts, Andre replied to Michael, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment, both on the technical solution and on identifying overlooked talent. Michael nodded approvingly. My office, 30 minutes. James, you'll join us. He glanced at Elizabeth. You too, Elizabeth. I think we all have much to learn from today's events. As Michael exited, the room buzzed with excited conversation. Engineers clustered in small groups, discussing both the technical breakthrough and the unexpected drama that had unfolded. Andre found himself at the center of attention, engineers approaching with questions, congratulations, and newfound respect. David Chen pushed through the crowd, extending his hand. That was incredible, he said, genuine admiration in his voice. I knew you were onto something when I first heard you muttering about the quantum learning dilemma. I should have spoken up sooner. Andre shook his hand firmly. You did speak up. That took courage. Not as much courage as challenging the CEO, David replied with a nervous laugh. I thought I was going to have a heart attack when you refused her job offer. Several nearby engineers nodded in agreement. Elizabeth Morgan was a formidable executive known for her sharp memory and sharper retribution. Contradicting her publicly wasn't something anyone did lightly, especially not someone as vulnerable as a security guard. James approached, professional composure masking the excitement in his eyes. I'd like to review your solution in more detail before we meet with Michael, he said. Would you walk me through your thinking? For 15 minutes, Andre and James engaged in a detailed technical discussion, surrounded by interested engineers. The conversation flowed naturally, technical terminology and complex concepts exchanged with mutual understanding and respect. No one watching would have guessed that one participant wore a security uniform rather than a company badge. Elizabeth observed from a distance, her expression unreadable. When James finally concluded their discussion, she approached with measured steps. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her tone professionally cordial. "A word in private before our meeting?" Andre nodded, following her to a quiet corner of the hackathon space. He noticed several engineers watching with barely concealed concern, worried perhaps that their CEO might attempt to undermine his unexpected triumph. Elizabeth turned to face him, her composure perfect once again. "That was quite a performance." "It wasn't a performance," Andre replied simply. "No," she conceded after a moment's consideration. "I suppose it wasn't." She studied him with new eyes, not as a security guard, but as an intellectual equal who had bested her in a very public arena. "You could have embarrassed me further, insisted on the exact terms of our agreement." Andre met her gaze steadily. That wouldn't have served any purpose beyond momentary satisfaction. Most people would consider public revenge against someone who humiliated them quite satisfying, Elizabeth observed. "I'm not interested in revenge," Andre said. "I'm interested in change." Elizabeth's smile held a hint of genuine respect for the first time. "A more dangerous ambition, Mr. Jackson." "Andre," he corrected gently. "Andre," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "You should know that Michael Reed is an idealist at heart. He'll embrace your vision enthusiastically. The board of directors, however, measures success in quarterly earnings and market position, not social impact." It was a warning, but also valuable insider information, the kind typically shared between allies, not adversaries. "I understand corporate realities," Andre replied. "Any program I propose will demonstrate clear business benefits alongside social impact." Elizabeth studied him thoughtfully. "You really have been planning this for some time." "Not this specifically," Andre admitted. "But I've had years to think about how technology companies could better identify and develop talent from unconventional backgrounds. While working security shifts and teaching yourself advanced AI concepts," Elizabeth added, a note of genuine curiosity entering her voice. "Why stay here? Why not apply to smaller startups with less rigid hiring practices?" Andre considered the question carefully. "Because change needs to start at the top. Tech Vision sets industry standards. If you transform your talent practices, others will follow." Elizabeth's expression shifted, subtly, recognition dawning that Andre hadn't just happened to be in the right place at the right time. He had positioned himself deliberately, waiting for an opportunity to demonstrate his value in a way that couldn't be ignored. "Well played," she said softly, professional respect evident in her tone. "It wasn't a game," Andre replied, "but I appreciate that you see it as well executed." James approached, checking his watch. "We should head up to Michael's office." As the three of them walked toward the elevator, engineers throughout the hackathon space paused their work to watch. The security guard, the chief engineer, and the CEO moving as equals toward a meeting that would potentially reshape not just Andre's future, but the future of talent development throughout the technology industry. David caught Andre's eye as they passed, giving him a subtle thumbs up. Andre nodded in acknowledgement, a simple gesture that carried layers of meaning. Success wasn't just personal advancement. It was creating pathways for others who would follow. As they stepped into the elevator, Elizabeth pressed the button for the executive floor. "Just so we're clear," she said, her voice low enough that only Andre and James could hear, "I have no intention of actually marrying you." After a moment of surprised silence, Andre's laugh, warm and genuine, filled the elevator. James joined in, the tension of the day finally breaking. "I think we can agree to revise those particular terms," Andre replied, a smile lingering on his face as the elevator doors closed. 6 months later, Andre Jackson stood in TechVision's gleaming lobby, watching a new cohort of talent development program participants arrive for their first day. 20 individuals from diverse backgrounds: former retail workers, service industry professionals, self-taught programmers without formal degrees, all selected through a rigorous skills assessment process that deliberately ignored traditional credentials. The Jackson Pathway program had moved from concept to reality with remarkable speed, driven by Michael Reed's enthusiastic support and, somewhat surprisingly, Elizabeth Morgan's strategic guidance. What had begun as a confrontation had evolved into an unlikely alliance, with Elizabeth recognizing both the business value and the positive PR potential of Andre's vision. "Nervous?" David asked, joining Andre by the floor-to-ceiling windows. In the months since the hackathon breakthrough, David had become both colleague and friend, now serving as a technical mentor in the program. "Excited," Andre corrected, watching as the participants gathered, their expressions mixing anxiety and anticipation. "They've all demonstrated exceptional abilities. Now they just need the right environment to develop them." The program combined paid technical work with formal education. Participants would spend 20 hours weekly contributing to actual TechVision projects while pursuing computer science coursework through the company's educational partnerships. Those who completed the 2-year program would graduate with both practical experience and academic credentials. "There's our CEO," David murmured, nodding toward the entrance where Elizabeth Morgan had just arrived. Elizabeth moved through the lobby with characteristic purpose, stopping briefly to welcome several program participants. Her conversion to champion of unconventional talent hadn't happened overnight, but once committed, she had applied the same strategic brilliance that had built her career to ensuring the program's success. "Andre," she greeted, approaching with an extended hand. "Today's the day. How are you feeling?" "Ready," he replied, shaking her hand firmly. Their relationship had evolved into something resembling mutual respect, not quite friendship, but a professional partnership built on recognized strengths. The board's quarterly review included the preliminary program metrics, Elizabeth informed him. "They were impressed by the caliber of talent you've identified." Andre nodded, unsurprised. "The ability was always there. We just created a way to recognize and develop it." "Well, your intuition is proving correct," Elizabeth acknowledged. "James reports that the program participants' contributions are already exceeding expectations." She glanced at her watch. "The welcome ceremony starts in 10 minutes. Michael wants you to give the opening address." "Me?" Andre raised an eyebrow. "Not you or Michael?" Elizabeth's smile held a hint of her old sharpness. "It's your vision, Andre, and your story resonates. These people need to hear from someone who stood where they're standing now." As she walked away to speak with other executives gathering for the ceremony, David nudged Andre's shoulder. "From security guard to program keynote in 6 months. Not bad." Andre watched the participants, people whose potential had been overlooked by traditional hiring processes, just as his had been. "It was never about my journey," he said quietly. "It was about changing the path for everyone who follows." The ceremony began with Michael Reed welcoming the inaugural cohort, speaking passionately about TechVision's commitment to identifying talent wherever it existed. When he introduced Andre as the program's founder and architect, genuine pride infused his voice. Andre approached the podium, momentarily struck by the journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he'd been checking IDs at the security desk, teaching himself advanced AI concepts during overnight shifts. Now he stood before executives, engineers, and program participants as the Director of Talent Innovation, a position created specifically for him. 6 months ago, I stood in this building wearing a different uniform, he began, his voice steady and clear. I was a security guard with a partial computer science education and a passion for artificial intelligence. Most people who passed me never made eye contact. I was an invisible part of the building's infrastructure rather than a person with ideas, abilities, and potential. He paused, looking out at the faces watching him intently. Then came a day when circumstances allowed me to demonstrate skills that didn't match my title. That opportunity changed my life, not just because it led to a new role, but because it highlighted a fundamental truth that shapes the program you're entering today. The room was completely silent, executives and participants alike hanging on his words. Talent has no uniform. Only opportunity wears disguises, Andre continued, his voice gaining strength. Each of you has demonstrated exceptional abilities that traditional systems failed to recognize. You've solved complex technical challenges, created innovative solutions, and shown the kind of thinking that drives true innovation. He gestured toward the Tech Vision executives lined up in the front row, Michael, Elizabeth, James, and others who had embraced the program despite initial skepticism. This company has committed to seeing beyond titles and credentials to recognize true ability. But this program isn't charity or corporate social responsibility. It's strategic talent development based on a simple premise. Brilliance exists everywhere, and companies that identify it first gain tremendous competitive advantage. Andre looked directly at the program participants, the true focus of both the ceremony and his personal mission. Over the next 2 years, you'll face challenges that test your abilities, determination, and resilience. You'll work on real projects with real impact while developing both practical skills and theoretical knowledge. It won't be easy, but you've already proven you have what it takes. His gaze moved to Elizabeth, who watched with an expression of professional appreciation. Their initial confrontation had transformed into a productive partnership neither could have anticipated. Success isn't just measured by individual achievement, Andre concluded. True success comes when you reach back to help others follow your path. That's the ultimate goal of this program. Not just to change your lives, but to change the way the entire technology industry identifies and develops talent. The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic. As Andre stepped away from the podium, he caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the room, a Tech Vision security guard watching the ceremony with particular interest. After the formal welcome concluded, Andre made his way through the crowd to where the guard stood. "Thomas, right?" Andre greeted, extending his hand. The young man nodded, surprised to be recognized. "Yes, sir." "Thomas Reyes. I noticed you've been taking the online courses offered through the Employee Education Program," Andre said. "Your instructor mentioned you've completed 3 advanced modules in record time." Thomas straightened slightly, pride briefly overcoming professional reserve. "I've always been interested in software development. Been teaching myself at night between shifts." The parallel to Andre's own journey wasn't lost on either of them. "The next program cohort begins accepting applications in 4 months, Andre said, reaching into his pocket for a business card. "I'd like to see your name in the applicant pool." Thomas accepted the card with careful reverence. "I wasn't sure if security staff would be considered." Andre smiled. "Thomas, that's exactly who this program was designed for." As Thomas returned to his post with renewed purpose in his step, Elizabeth approached from behind. "Recruiting already for the next cohort?" she asked, a knowing expression on her face. "Identifying talent," Andre corrected. "It's what we do now." Elizabeth studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when you refused my job offer that day, I thought you were either crazy or playing a longer game than I could see." "And now?" Andre asked. "Now I think you might have been the most strategic person in that room," she admitted. "Including me." They watched together as the program participants mingled with Tech Vision engineers and executives, artificial barriers of title and background temporarily suspended. "The industry is already taking notice," Elizabeth continued. 3 competing firms have announced similar initiatives in the past month." Andre nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. That was always the goal. Systemic change requires more than one company's efforts. Elizabeth's phone chimed with a meeting reminder. Board presentation in 15 minutes. They're expecting updated projections on program ROI. We'll exceed them, Andre said confidently. Talent that's been overlooked is hungry to prove itself. These participants will outperform traditional hires in ways the metrics don't even capture yet. Elizabeth studied him with genuine curiosity. You never seem to doubt this will succeed. Because I've lived it, Andre replied simply. I know what people can achieve when barriers are removed and ability is recognized. As Elizabeth departed for her meeting, Andre remained in the lobby, watching Thomas at his security post attentive, professional, and now holding a pathway to a future limited only by his abilities rather than his current title. The security uniform that had once made Andre invisible now represented something entirely different, not a limitation, but the beginning of a journey that anyone with talent and determination could undertake. True victory wasn't just changing his own circumstances, it was changing the system itself. If Andre's journey from security guard to tech innovator moved you, there's more where that came from. Beat Stories brings you powerful narratives of underdogs rising, hidden talents shining, and moments when everything changes in an instant. Like this video if you believe talent deserves recognition, no matter what uniform it wears. Subscribe to Beat Stories for weekly doses of inspiration that remind us all. Sometimes the most extraordinary abilities hide in the most unexpected places.
One story can wake up a crowd. One moment of clarity can crack years of silence. At Beat Stories, we find those moments, and we share them loud and clear. If this made you think, hit subscribe. This is just the beginning.